Good morning. This is the
Hi.
Blain's World webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You get more information and listen to previous shows at our website, which is behind me. Might be in reverse, but it's blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Daughter, who's an author, consultant, educator, who also happens to be a friend of mine. Welcome aboard, Steve.
Hi, Blaine. How you doing?
I'm doing well. And by the way, you can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, that's Steve Daughter. Steve Daughter is an author, consultant, and educator who also happened to be a guy I went to high school with a couple of years ago.
Just a
For,
few.
can you believe it? For 50 years, he has the number astounds me, doesn't it?
I know.
That both career, friendship, whatever. For 50 years, he has consulted people ranging from CEOs of Fortune 500 corporations to troubled teenagers on work, career, and life issues. He is the retired president of People Management Northeast. During his long career, Steve has interviewed and evaluated close to 5,000 people, has taught courses on career counseling and managing to strengths at the University of Hartford and St. Joseph College. And Steve, before we get into your background, I have to ask you, because I know a little bit about it, having read one of your other books, which I loved, and what was the name of that book? Your story?
Probably the lessons from life.
The lesson that was the one that had your life story, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And your story amazed me because I knew you in high school, okay? And I guess I wouldn't have predicted that this guy that this guy was going to be a had his own company, was going to be an author too. When you were a kid growing up, what did you want to become?
Well, I spent most of my teenage years gambling. And so I remember, you'll remember the name Jeff Snyder,
Sure.
Mark Milberg, Scott Anton. We all worked at this Hampton VIP beach club. And I remember towards the end of the season, we're sitting by the lifeguard stand having a beer, and people were talking about what they wanted to do with their lives. And when it came to my turn, the only thing I could think of was to be a croupier. If I'm saying that the right word,
It
at a
is.
casino, because I love the feeling of turning over cards and seeing what would happen. Um, Never thought I'd write a book. In fact, as you may remember, I was actually left back, and then they kind of graduated me, even though I never took English 4.
Oh,
And
really?
no, yeah, and my wife, who's a teacher, said that's impossible. You'd have to take 4 years of high school English. And so I got my transcript, and when I got my transcript, it said 2 credits for, in essence, English 3,
Right.
and it had an asterisk that said special situation. My feeling is they wanted me out of high school. So they graduated me. I was a lousy student. I was almost at the bottom of my class. So the thought of actually becoming a writer and doing what I did just seemed pretty far away from where I was.
Yep. When we were a kid, though, gambling, right, wasn't legal. I mean, people could bet illegally, but there wasn't, you couldn't go into a casino or you couldn't,
No, no, it was all poker.
right. Oh, was it?
It was Friday night, Saturday night, and we played pretty high stakes poker games. So it was yeah.
Were
So
you good at it?
yeah, I was. You talk about spending time learning, and I used to spend where people may be doing a lot of time studying.
Right.
I would sit on my living room floor with a deck of cards, and I would deal out 7 card stud for hours upon hours. And I never counted cards, but I always felt I had a feel for the game, kind of in the moment. And I do believe when you watch sports and a team gets hot, they don't miss anything. When a player gets hot, he doesn't miss anything. And when they get cold, nothing can go right. Even when it looks like everything's going to be great, but it still doesn't work out. Like the Washington game this weekend with Chicago. You thought
Right.
Chicago won the game, and then all of a sudden that unbelievable, pass. So I just had a feel for the game, and so that's how I spent a lot of my youth.
I also knew you as a basketball player, right? You
Yeah,
were on the team. I was
Yeah.
I guess the student manager at the time.
Yeah.
You played several years
Yeah.
for Lawrence High School?
Yeah. Fred
Yeah,
Seeger. Remember Fred Seeger?
I do. And it's funny, I tried to get in touch with him, never was able to afterwards, but he was
Yeah.
quite a character. So I had to
By the way,
get,
he was the high school coach
I know,
for the
yeah,
audience out there.
yeah, it just, and I was friendly with the guy, but he was kind of a unique guy. So cool then. So you graduated toward the bottom of your class at Lawrence High School. How'd you get into college, or what got you
Well,
to college?
you know, in our old neighborhood, a lot of people went to college. So I always just assumed I was going to college. Really, I was the youngest in my family. So by the time my parents had me, they were in their 40s. So I was talking to my brother the other day, and he said, you know, they treated you like you were a feral cat. So I could just kind of roam all over and do what I wanted to do. But I just assumed I was going to college. So I found a college in the back of well, I applied to Southern Illinois. I applied to a bunch of schools. Of course, I never got in. But I also picked a college out of the back of a magazine.
Yeah.
And that was the first college I went to. It was called Hiram Scott College. It existed for about 4 years. But I transferred out after one. And do you want to hear the rest of this?
Yeah, I do. It's fascinating. And
Okay.
by the way, so
So
you were going to Southern, that was where Clyde Frazier
Scottsbluff, Nebraska.
what? Oh, was it?
At
Yeah.
Hiram Scott College was in Scottsbluff, Nebraska.
But the other one you applied to, wasn't that Clyde Frazier went there? Southern,
Well, he thought, yeah, that's why I applied to Southern Illinois because Clyde Fraser graduated from Southern Illinois, and I figured, well, if he thought it was a good school, I should go there. I had no concept of, what it took to go to college, and
I digress. By the way, same thing too. I think I actually applied to University of Nebraska because Fred Seeger went there,
there we go.
so I had no Nebraska. How was I going to go there?
Yeah.
But
What
anyway,
influences us 18-year-olds, right?
exactly. So what
Yeah.
happened? So
So I
you
left.
transferred after
I
a
left
year.
after one semester. Was working at actually Date Shopwell in the dairy department, and my sister called me, and her husband. I don't know, for people from Syracuse, New York, her husband was president of a department store. The name is eluding to me, but he was on the board of Mohawk Valley Community College. And she called me one day and she said, my brother is not going to college. And you are enrolled at Mohawk Valley Community College. And it's on a tri-semester. So in January or February, I ended up in Utica, New York at Mohawk Valley Community College. And can I just take a digression here? Because you talk about people stepping into your life.
Sure.
And someone stepped into my life at Mohawk Valley Community College, which was really probably one of the biggest turning points, in my life. So I was sort of like Joe Ferrone and up the down staircase. I was, rebellious. I was not, I just didn't engage in school at all. And I had a problem with sleeping in class. And so I would always sit in the back of the row, second seat, not on the aisle, but second seat in. So it was easy for me. And I would kind of sit like this, but I'd close my eyes and I could just kind of escape. And so I went to this class. This was a professor, Steve Mocco. And he started teaching and he gave us something to read. I don't ever recall doing homework prior to this, what I'm going to tell you about. And he said, what does this story mean? And people were giving their opinions and he was pacing back and forth, left and right. And he was accepting these opinions. And I thought he was full of shit. Sorry, I'm not allowed to curse.
No, that's
But
okay.
I thought he was full of it. So I decided to throw out the most asinine theory that I could think of. And he said, that's possible. Why do you think so? And I was like, blah, blah, blah. It's like I didn't really have an explanation. But there was something about the way he interacted that I liked. So I went home and I read the assignments that night and went back to Thursday's class. And there I am sitting in this class in the back of the room. And he says, I don't feel like teaching today. Would anyone like to teach? And there was like a little pang in me. But school had always been a place of
Sure.
failure for me, as opposed to, playing poker and opposed to playing basketball or baseball, but mostly basketball. And so no one obviously raised their hand. And he said it again, would anyone like to teach? Then he walked down the road to me in front of me and he said, Mr. Darter, how would you like to teach the class today? And I froze and there was a part of me that really wanted to do it. And I just said, okay. And I got up and I walked to the front of the class. I remember in a cold sweat, and I stood in front of the class and I had read the stuff. So I felt like I knew it pretty good. And I said, what does the story mean? And I paced back and forth the way he did, and I behaved like he did. And I was alive. I was absolutely alive. And that was so intoxicating. And as a side note, he and I are still in
I
contact.
was just going to ask you. So,
Yeah.
by the way, please, I don't know if you did the last time, we may mention his name, but please send a copy. I want to send you the link. Share
Yes.
it with him afterward that we talked about him on the
We'll
show.
do. Yeah. Well,
Well,
yeah, I do it through his, I threw it to his through his daughter now. But but he's about 90 years old,
God bless.
and he's like my Tuesdays with Maury kind of guy, you
Sure.
know. And he and embarked me on a career, and embarked me on a philosophy of life. What I started to do is I said I've got to do well in school, and I decided that I wasn't going to sit in the back of the class anymore. So I began sitting in the front of class. Well, I was interacting in his classes, which was easy, but then in other classes with other professors, I decided to sit in the front. And I remember it was history was the first one, and all of a sudden I'm starting to close my eyes, my head is starting to fall. So I decide to just look at the guy teaching, and I realize that he's talking to me, and I'm staying awake, and this was like an adrenaline rush. um, but it still didn't prevent me from starting to doze off. So just as my head was falling, I raised my hand and I asked a question, and it was like an adrenaline rush in my body, and he responded to me. And I realized that every time I could feel myself going to sleep, I'd raise my hand, ask a question, and then I realized I can control the direction that class would go in by the questions that I could ask. And that was again intoxicating. It was really enjoyable. And so I started learning things because I love being able to be in a position where I could be informative or helpful or have an impact on people. And I started to read and study and learn. And there it is, years later. I not only have a bachelor's degree, but I have a master's degree, and I have an EDS, and I taught in graduate school in two colleges. And so
But
Steve Mako was an amazing impact on my life.
great story. By the way, you're giving good advice if anybody's listening to this. You mentioned two things. That one, um, to get involved in a class, and one of the ways you said it, I used to tell my students that too, is sit up front, not in the back,
Yeah.
and get involved in it. But the other thing you gave sort of a testimony to doing is the idea of getting friendly with your teachers, in a very positive way, and getting to know them. Because I always found, Steve, that I'd love it when somebody showed an interest, and I just wish more students would show an interest, so that you show a great story. So thanks for sharing that.
Welcome.
Mohawk, did you graduate from there?
No, actually, there's another story. So I hitchhiked with some friends from Mohawk Valley Community College to SUNY at Oswego, State
Right.
University of North Oswego. And I met this really cute girl there that weekend, and I decided that I wanted to transfer there.
A
And
good
so I
reason.
applied to transfer to SUNY Oswego, and they rejected me. And so I identified a program that they had that was only at SUNY at Oswego. And I contacted the admissions department and I asked for an interview where I could make my case. And I made my case and they accepted me. And I got up to SUNY Oswego, and that girl was no longer there.
Oh,
But I
well,
ended up graduating from SUNY Oswego.
and what was the program?
I don't remember. It was some sort of social something or other. But but I found the angle that I could use to get in there.
But what a great story too. So you got out of there, and what was your degree there?
Oh, I ended up a degree in sociology from there, and
Okay,
then my master's is in education, and my EDS is in counseling. Um, just as a side note, the thing about that story with Steve Mako is, so I've spent my 50-year career. I realized that everybody has potential. I didn't really think I wasn't tall enough to play basketball. I wasn't going to become a professional gambler. And I didn't really think, because I had failed in school so much, that I didn't think I had really that much potential. But when I taught like that in that class and when I interacted, I really came to believe that everybody has potential and everybody has natural talents and natural gifts. And so once I started my professional career, I spent, I interviewed people to identify their natural talents, their natural gifts, and to help them make decisions. I ended up working for a lot of large corporations, doing evaluations, for selection, for team building, conflict resolution, performance problems, uh, help people to use their talents and gifts to better manage themselves, which is what my first book was about, called Managing Yourself, Managing Others. But the basis of that started when I was kind of this loser at 19, and Steve Mocco gave me this opportunity, and I went from a guy who fell asleep in class to a guy who was so unbelievably engaged in school and in learning and in education. And I found for me the key that really motivated me and turned me on. And so, I was doing that, for others. Can I tell you one more quick story if
Yeah,
I
but
could?
before you do,
Yeah.
just what was that key then?
Well, for me, is I see potential and I like
Okay.
going after potential. And writing for me is like a journey where I'm identifying that potential. Okay. I was doing an executive development leadership program for 11 executives. And I happened to tell that story. No, I was talking about potential, and this one person came up to me and she said to me, my husband's a math teacher and he's just going to get out of teaching because he has no impact on people. And I was just starting to write that book, Lessons for Life. And so I sent her that story about Steve Mocco, at least the version that I had at that point. And she got back to me and she said, my husband read it and he's so invigorated now as a teacher because he realized he could have an impact on people's lives without even knowing that he's having an impact in their lives, which was really the reason why I decided to then track down Steve Mocco if I could, because I said, he doesn't know what an amazing impact he had on my life with that one identifying the potential in me and giving me the opportunity.
I'll share with you something that you can steal from me if you want, but you do in large part, I think, what I try to do. And so a student came up with this title for me when I was teaching and called me a CEO. You may have seen that on my card.
Yep.
I just love it because that's what I try to do, and it's what you try to do too. A chief encouragement officer,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I think as a teacher you're in business to do, to encourage, to have people
Yeah.
grow. And it's amazing as you're talking, Steve, how many people, teachers in particular, made an impact on my life. And it was cool. I kept in touch with several of them, which was really great all my life. It was a great experience to still be in touch with them, and tell them they made a difference in my life. I cut you off. You had one more story you wanted to share?
No, if I did, Blaine, at our age of 75, if I did, it's gone out of
Yeah.
my mind
Or no,
right now.
Steve, what you say,
But I
our
do tell
age.
stories, so I'll find others to tell.
Yeah, our age, what is it? I tell people, same kind of thing. I forget three things, right? Names, faces. I can't remember that third thing. So I
That's a good
relate to it
one.
well. Steve, fast forward then, if you would. Great story you have. To you went to college, graduated college. How'd you get into the business world then? What was your thinking at that
Well,
time?
I ended up getting a job at running the career planning and placement office at St. Joseph
Oh,
College,
okay.
which is in West Hartford, Connecticut, not the
Right.
one in Philadelphia. Now it's called University of St. Joseph. And I was running the career planning and placement office and went to a conference at Bucknell University, not far from, where you were living, I guess, in
Right.
Pennsylvania. And I was in the lobby, and this gray-haired guy comes walking in, Art Miller, and he looks bewildered and lost. And I asked him if I could help him, and he said he's supposed to be a speaker the next day. And I made a, and he was looking for his conference host,
Right.
and so I was trying to help him find his conference host. And I made the mistake, not really, but I made the mistake of saying to him, "What are you going to talk about?" And for the next 2 hours, I was listening to him talk about this whole idea of giftedness and natural talent. And he's the guy who I developed the process, and started this organization. And he was making a presentation the next day, and I went to that, and I was absolutely fascinated. Discovered that he was only about 10 miles from where I worked, and being the skeptic that I was, I we talk about, if you have kids, you have more than one kid, two kids, they're different,
Right.
almost like different from birth. There's stuff that you do that you absolutely love to do, and other stuff you just as soon be in the bottom of the pile. And if your job involved all those things you love to do, you're highly motivated. If you do that stuff that you really don't enjoy doing, it's difficult to stay motivated and energetic. And so I went to his office for weeks, and they gave me transcripts of these interviews that they did to see if I could identify themes. And it came very easy to me. And so there I was 1 year into working at St. Joseph College, and they started hiring me part time. I only shaved twice, 2 or 3 times a week. I was so young that I would be working with executives. But at that point in my life, it was all over the phone. And I remember the first person I worked with was the VP of research for, I think, not Uniroyal, the one up in Michigan. I can't think of the name. But, so he gave me opportunity after opportunity. And eventually I became president of the company.
Is he
And
still around?
no, I went to his funeral
Oh,
about 4 or 5 years ago. But
okay.
he's the second person that had this unbelievable impact, on my life. And in the book, I describe him as a combination of Johnny Appleseed and Don Quixote. Um, Don Quixote, because he would travel all the way cross country chasing a windmill, trying to convince somebody that what he was saying about people and giftedness was right. And Johnny Appleseed is he would hire people like me and others, and he'd give us a seed, an opportunity, and you wouldn't see him again. It was hard to find him because he was always out someplace else. But fortunately, I, being the feral cat that I was, I guess, I was motivated by the opportunity that he gave me. So,
What's incredible about that story is how things change, like, whim, that just, had you not been outside and seen that guy, your
yeah,
life, like, it reminds me of one of my favorite films. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Sliding Doors. Are you familiar with it?
no,
Put It Down it's your story. It's with a beautiful film with Gwyneth Paltrow. I forgot who
yeah,
the lead is, Sliding
yeah,
Doors. But
yep,
it's your story exactly, how she gets into a subway, and if she gets in, her life will go one way, but then part of it, the other half of it, they show her not getting in.
yeah,
And just that one moment, you being in the lobby, changed your whole life.
yeah,
It's amazing, isn't it?
yeah. And it was funny. I was watching this morning. I stretch every morning for about an hour, and I was watching a documentary on Gene Wilder,
Oh, I saw
and
that.
that's
Was it
how. Did you see that documentary?
beautiful, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's how he starts the story. If I walk left through the around the park, I don't meet Anne Bancroft.
Right.
And Anne Bancroft is married to
Well, Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks,
Yeah.
and she likes me. And finally, and they put me in, Blazing Saddles in the play and all of that. And he goes, "I'd be a minor actor if I didn't go right instead of left." And I think life is a lot like that. And some people don't take opportunities. They remain, like one of my poems is called "Suppression is Oppression," or "Oppression is Suppression." Let me read it to you.
Yeah. Hold on a second, though.
Okay.
Just because I'm loving your story. We'll finish the story, then we'll get into the poetry, which is a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
But so you had this career. Actually, we can jump right into it. So you had this career, but you also, I guess, toward the end of it, you started writing. What got you into writing?
Well, so there I am, the president of the company. I hire somebody to build workshops, for corporations.
Right.
And she says to me, "I need a book." So in 3 weeks, I wrote the first book. Um, and, I mean, I wrote it, but then it took me another maybe 4 or 5 months to shape it. And so that was the one called Managing Yourself, Managing Others. I did that in 2001. I redid it in 2011 and redid it in 2015. So that was to support my consulting, but also the whole business. And we gave it out to everybody that we worked with, and it was kind of the consulting book, you know. The second book, Lessons for Life, that really came about when both my parents died. And I found stories and poems, not stories, but poems that they wrote to each other and words that they wrote to each other, particularly when they were first falling in love. And I found my mother's diary. And I said, this is really cool to read this stuff and to get into the mind of your parents, when they're 19 years old. So I decided I'd write some stories, just about my life. So when I died, my kids and my grandkids would go, wow, I didn't know that about grandpa or dad. Um, and then I showed it to Art Miller, who was living then, and he said, just the way you like to impact on people and influence, it's not going to be good enough just to have it for them. And I said, no, it'll be good enough. And but then the story came with the teacher from the woman who, she was in Atlanta. And I realized that the stories can have an impact on people. So I decided to really make this into a book. And Art had then, by then, had sent some of what I'd written to an editor that he knew at Random House. And the editor at Random House contacted me and he said, I absolutely love your writing, but no one cares about you and your stories because you're not
Well,
Oprah Winfrey.
excuse me. I
Yeah,
cared. I really did too,
yeah,
because reading that was the book that I read,
yeah,
I think, and
yeah.
reviewed. And it's like my high school days, all these people I knew, I just loved it. But I cut you off. So you said it wasn't of interest to people you went to high school with.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry.
So what happened?
So the editor at Random House was basically saying we need to see 50,000 copies, and no one really cares about you because I don't mean it that way, but
Right.
you're not Oprah, you're not someone in the news, you're not controversial. He said, but I will work with you to shape it into a book that I think we could be interested in, and then I would present it to the acquisition committee. So for the next 2 years, he voluntarily worked with me and helped me shape the stories into a book that had themes, a theme to it. Um, and then he presented it to the acquisition committee, but they rejected it.
And shout out, by the way, is that person still around?
No, that's the editor.
Yeah.
I don't know when he retired. His LinkedIn is still is in the with that Random House. It
Right.
was Waterbrook Multnomah, something like that. And so he may be still around,
What,
but
what
I
was
think he
what was
just
his what was his name?
um, it's in the back of the book.
Okay. Well, just all I'm saying, Steve, you don't have to get it
Yeah,
now. But yeah, let's also, if we dig up his name, send him a copy of this interview as well. just say we were
yeah,
talking about him,
yeah.
how he made a
Well, I've
difference.
tried to track him down. I think he just decided, he's off, because he'd probably be well connected and people would always try to
Sure,
get to him and and all of that. So that's how that book, came about. And can I share something else?
sure.
So you probably see it in when I send you an email. So one day out of the blue, I get an email that says your book was named one of the
Oh
14
yeah,
most profound books about finding yourself. I said, wow. I didn't, and it's from a media company in England. So I click on the link, and my book was ranked number one most profound book about finding yourself. And I remember now, Tina Fey's book was number two.
oh really?
Um, and the woman who worked like Eat, Pray, Love, I think one of her books was like
Gilbert,
8, 9, or 10.
right.
And I was like, wow, astounded. And then about a year and a half ago, I was just, I don't know if you do this. Every once in a while, I'll Google myself to see if anybody says anything negative, about
Right.
me. And there comes another link that my book was ranked. I forgot what it was called, but another company in England a media company that focuses on expatriates, to make your life better. So the book gets out there and people identify it, and but I describe it as kind of a philosophical, spiritual, self-help memoir.
And by the way, since you're talking about it, name of the book again, Steve, is
That one,
there you go. Okay.
that that one's called Lessons for Life, Four Keys, Four Keys for Living with More Meaning, Purpose, and Success at Any Age.
Great title too, and that's available through, I guess, Amazon or
Amazon, you know,
Barnes and Noble, wherever you want.
a variety of different places.
Okay.
It's all over the place.
So again, let me have you fast forward.
Yeah.
So I guess you and I got reconnected through that book and, read it, had lots of discussions about it, told you loved it. But then talk about your poetry. So when did you decide to become a poet?
Well, I don't consider myself a poet. I wrote
Well,
poetry, but I never really wrote poetry. I mean, dabbled like a little bit, but mostly what I do is like I think I indicated before. I kind of half live or three quarters live in a world of emotions and ideas, and so I often get up in the middle of the night or wherever I am, and I write on slips of paper, little thoughts and ideas. And I got behind me four books of you know notebooks of ideas and just thoughts that I had. Um, so a couple of years ago, maybe 3, 4 years ago, my little granddaughter Libby, she showed me a poem she wrote, which I have here because she's like 10 years old, and I was like blown out of the water. And she and I are in common in sync that we both are kind of like enjoy writing. And I decided that I'm going to write a poetry book. And so I got out these slips of paper and this half-written poems that I wrote maybe when I was 17 or 18 or 19, and shaped it into a book. And Art Miller's wife is a poet. She's written 14 poetry books. So after I put these together somewhat, I sent it to her to say, what do you think? And she said, I really like your poetry. I'm going to recommend a publisher to you. And so I sent it to the publisher. It's called Whiff and Stock, which really produces one of the major publishers of theology, ethics, religious, and poetry, other categories, and poetry books. And I sent it to them. And 3 weeks later, they said, we'd like to publish it.
very
So then
exciting.
I had to then shape it more and more.
Talk about your process, Steve, which I find fascinating, or any writer's process. Is this something you do every day? Do you write for 2 hours every morning? What's your process?
Well, life gets in the way of the things you really want to do. So some mornings I get up and I have to I always go through my emails. I hate it when people don't respond to me. Like you always respond, and so I always respond to whatever emails I get, and try to be helpful to people or answer their questions or not keep them lingering. But generally, I enjoy writing. Sometimes I get up in the middle of the night and I write until I'm exhausted. And what happens is a thought comes into my head, and I have no idea where I'm going with it, or a memory. Like in books, Lessons for Life, I'd wake up in the morning and there was a memory, and I barely remember the memory, but it's there as a nugget. And then I start sitting down and I just start writing. And the writing process for me is a discovery, is a journey and a discovery, but it's also the way to synthesize, to pull together, what am I really trying to say? And I love the process of writing and editing, putting it away, bringing it back. I used to say to people, I could be writing all morning. And then I realized it's 11 o'clock, 11:30. This is when Diane taught, my wife, Diane. And so I was home alone, and I said, I haven't eaten anything yet. So I decide that I'm going to put a pork chop, a frozen pork chop, on a frying pan on low. I don't know why I use a microwave, but and then I go back in and I'll write a little bit, and I'm writing or editing, and I probably ended up taking the same paragraph and changing it and changing it and changing it and changing it, and then I realized it's been a half an hour, and so I go back in the kitchen, and I'm absolutely lost in the idea of trying to find a word, and when it's finished, I feel like it's an artist, and I'm not an artist. I'm not. When I read some of the things that people write, they're much, much better writers, than me, and I'm in awe of them. But I like sitting back and going, I captured that. It feels like it's the right thing. You know what I mean? It feels
Does,
right.
does it ever happen that after you finish, in particular, a poem, that you go back a year later or 2 years later, want to change it, modify it? Does that ever happen?
Well, some of the poems in the book were actually things that I wrote, um, you know, so let's say 20 and I'm 75. So what, 50 years ago, 55 years ago? And I pick it up and I read it and I go, ugh. But I like the nugget of it, And some of the poems that I wrote about my father were actually written a long time ago, and they really pretty much withstood the time. There was one about going to visit him and when he was older and everything. But yeah, you know, but most of the poems in the book and most of the poems I have now are all pretty much written or finalized, you know, in the last year or two.
Because one of the things I loved about the book, as I'm looking at it, too, how you divided the categories, and you and I even talked about when you were doing this. I remember you were
Yeah.
shifting things around and changing it. But first of all, the title is just a great idea. It's inside your mind, so you get an idea of Steve Daughter's mind. And then I love as I'm looking at it with you, I just love the concepts of the different segments. So you had how many different segments was it?
About 5 or 6.
I'm into love of family and stuff like that. But you had it was so interesting how you put it together. Yeah, that's the book. But I'm looking for the table of contents or the sections. There were boy, look at this. You even have my there's something for me in there about
Yeah,
what
your
I liked
endorsement.
about the book. But Steve, talk about then without going through the whole book. Here it is. So your categories were kind of interesting. You started out, which I thought was spot on, a love of family. You talked about observing people, approaches approaching the end of life, moving on, and then God. Um, I'll put you on the spot here. I'll let you choose, if we have time, I'll go through a couple of poems, but I'll let you choose any one poem that I'd
Okay,
like you to share.
sure. So, talking about observing people, first of all, the title I really wanted, and I was talked out of it, was "Inside the Mind of an Old Man." And I even now I vacillate back and forth whether I should have stuck my ground and stayed with that. But they saw that as a limited title,
I hear
and
you.
but I really, it's like we're older and we think about things now that we wouldn't imagine thinking about. Um, anyway, and so the shaping of the book that took difficulty. But one of the things that happened is I write all my poetry in the I. I walked out the door, I did this, or I saw that. And I have some poems in there that are not about me at all, but I wrote them in the I. So if you remember, we had two of our high school classmates who died of heroin overdoses. I don't know if you know that, and I'm not gonna, mention their names, but I was very taken by that. And I knew some of our high school classmates who had become heroin addicts. And so I wrote two poems way back then at age 19 or 20, but I wrote them in the I. I was waiting in the alley for you. I was, what pulled up or whatever, and walking into a drug den and the crackling of the record, and no one saw me come in. And people thought I was talking about my life. And so that was the feedback I was getting. And I realized I can't do them in the I. So a lot of the poems became a he or a she. So some of the poems are about me and feelings that I had or observations that I made. Some of them are empathy, for things that I thought, and some of them are really about other people. So that's why I called it observing people.
Well, let me
And
ask you too, since you
yeah,
mentioned it earlier, the one I'll actually make a request. And if you would, the poem about your dad, could you
yeah,
share that one?
yeah, I got to find it first.
Oh, okay. Or
Well, I have three of them. I have three of them about my dad. One of them is very long, so I won't do that one. It's about him dying, and what it was like being there.
was he around when you wrote the poems, or did he see any of your poems?
Yeah, in fact, the poem I'll read to you. Now I'll read you another one. Wow, yeah, I don't know. I'll read that one. He actually wrote me a poem back when I showed it to him.
Very
Let me
cool.
just find it for a second here. Um, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. Okay. Page 31.
Okay.
There we go. This was not one of them I was going to pick out, but okay. It's called Do You Remember Me? I said, not long ago, my boyish appearance and pimply skin would burst into the room with gales of happiness or cries of sadness. How you comforted me then, told me of a day that was to be, how hopeful of the future I became, and so silently scared of the next day. Do you remember how, in my struggling age of independence, we argued far into the night? how I felt my wisdom was that of an experienced man, and you knew it wasn't? And now do you see how I've grown to be the man that you knew I was meant to be able to look at me, hang in there, to look at me and see how much I've learned since then, to be as wise as I am now, and to realize how infinitely much more I need to know to be as wise as you were in raising me the way you did.
Oh,
So
so
I gave him that, I think, for his birthday, and he wrote me a poem back saying, "Oh, I remember you."
yeah. But it reminds me too, the expression was that the older you get, the smarter your father becomes,
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
reminds me of the same thing too. I thought my father was a jerk, when I was younger. And then
yeah,
all of a sudden he got smarter. And I remember, well, I, for a long time, copied his haircut, he just
yeah,
slick it back and he was ahead of his time, but it was the easiest haircut to maintain. Just slick it back
yeah,
with Bill cream. But that's a beautiful story. And he must have gotten quite a kick out of reading it or seeing it.
yeah.
Um,
He really did. He and I had a great relationship when I was young, and a very, very bad relationship because I was this kind of troubled child. And then when I turned that part of my life around, he and I had a wonderful, wonderful, relationship. And you know, wish he was
Lovely.
still around, but he's not. But I'll see him in heaven. I know it.
Okay, God bless. One other, Steve, if you can. I'll let you
Okay.
choose this one.
Okay. Okay. Let me go to this one here. Um, this is called listening. It says they screamed at one another, each taking a turn. One yelling traitor, the other yelling burn. They didn't need to know what the other had meant, for truth rested solely on what each had to vent. They pointed fingers, raised their hands, and let emotions fly. The rock and gun replaced the word, and now we ask why. If I remember, he said, I can't seem to remember what was in his head, but I was right, and that's for sure, even if I can't remember what we argued for.
So true.
That's
Uh,
called listening.
yeah, it's great line at the end.
Yeah.
Have you ever done any poetry readings?
No,
No? You
no,
know,
because that's supposed to be how you're supposed to market
right,
poetry,
right.
but I'm still trying to get reviews right now. So I'm writing. I sent emails to people I know and family, and now I've identified reviewers. Can I do one more because I had
Please.
mentioned it before?
Sure.
It's because I think I don't know. I thought it was appropriate because I mentioned it before. It's called "Suppression is Oppression." Okay, suppression is oppression, whether self-inflicted or by others, intentionally or unintentionally, holding himself back, not doing what God created him to do, not being who God created him to be, diminishing his life and God's intent. He needs to have faith, strength to rise above the suppression, to overcome the oppression. It's not easy. He knows this, he says. A fight he faces each day, periodically losing, holding back out of fear, suppressing himself, oppressing himself, lacking the confidence to move forward. He wishes he had a person, a team that believed in him, that would step in, lift him up when his knees grow weak and his legs give out.
Very
So
nice.
I was oppressing myself when I was 17 and 18 and 19 years old, and still Steve Mako stepped into my life.
Steve, daughter, moving forward,
Yes.
where do you see your next book?
Well, so my father had a troubled youth, and he came out fine. I had a troubled youth and in difficulties with my father, and that worked itself out. My son has had a lot of difficulty, and we had difficulties together, and we are so loving and in sync. So I think the relationships between fathers and sons, particularly fathers and troubled sons who are trying to grow up, I think that's where the next book is going to be.
And do you see it as poetry or
No, no, not
fiction?
as poetry. I'm actually seeing it maybe as letters.
Lovely.
You know, um, I don't see myself writing a novel because I'm just my business partner, who by the way was Art Miller's son, so we became business partners in owning the business. He always referred to me as splash and dash. I like to step in, impact, have a good positive influence, and then move on. So I'm not a hands-on hanging there coaching with you, for months and months and months. So the idea of writing something that's a novel, where you sort of need to outline it and everything, it doesn't fit my style. So I'm thinking in terms of letters that the son leaves and it's years later and he's writing, he says, I don't want to get back together. And I don't want to tell you where I am, but here's what I'm thinking. But respond to me to this post office box, you know,
But I
and,
love the
and
concept. But you say it's not a novel, but it sounds like a novel. So it's a great concept.
but it allows me to take a moment. Here I was on top of a mountain, or here I was working, as a barback, or here I was working in a slaughterhouse, and here's what I'm thinking. And the father writes back and saying, I can relate, or here's a question, or I don't understand. And the son has an opportunity to explain. Um, and I'll just draw on my father's life, my son's life, books I've read, things I imagine, my imagination, and I don't know. We'll see where it goes. It's a journey to me, and it'll probably help me flesh out some of the feelings that I have deep inside and some of the ideas that I have.
And just you describing it, I have to tell you, I love the concept. It's
Thank
just
you.
it really you got me interested in it.
Thank you.
Steve
Will you
Daughter,
endorse the book?
for sure, I will. Steve Daughter, if folks want to get in touch with you, two things. In terms of your books, so we have the two books, you have a third book as well. Best bet
Yep.
is to find you on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon is a good place to be. Um, yeah, best is probably Amazon. That's the easiest.
Okay. And also, if folks want to get in touch with you outside of your books, is there a website, email address, some way they could reach
Yeah,
you?
I have two websites. One is my author website, which is I think it's Steve Darter. If you just Google my name,
We'll
Steve
find you.
Darter or Stephen Darter. So there's the author website. I think it's like stevedarter.com or something like that. And then there's my business website, although I'm pretty much retired. Um, but my business website, it's called People Management, SMD.com. But they're linked together. So if you get to one, you can easily get to the other because interviews that I've done are in one, but the books I've written are in the other. But my son builds websites and he does Google advertising, so he set up my two websites. So I'm not very smart about stuff like that.
And both of the websites have ways to get in touch with you if they want.
Yes, my email address is in both, and it's smdarter@gmail.com.
Okay.
Stephen
And
Martin
mention,
Darter at gmail.com.
I'll just mention an idea sort of you alluded to, but that's a great way to also make contacts. And I've done that a lot in my life too. You read a book and then write the author,
Yeah.
just it's very exciting when authors get, letters from people. And as Steve indicated, I will guarantee you this, if you write Steve Daughter, you will get an answer back.
I'll respond. I've
Okay.
I've written to some authors complimenting on their books, and I'm not going to tell who they were, but I had their email addresses, or I got them through their websites, and a lot of them don't respond.
Yeah,
And
it's funny, same thing too, but I've written two, trying to think of them, and one you'll know. But one became a very close personal friend, But I loved his book, wrote him, and we had a lifetime, a lifelong, back and forth.
yeah,
The other guy, quick funny story, and I'll leave you alone on it, was Bill Veck. You remember who Bill Veck was, the baseball
yeah,
um, guru? And I wrote him, and he wrote me back, and we had a correspondence back and forth for a lot of years until he had the audacity. He died on me. He stopped writing.
yeah,
I was so annoyed with him, Steve.
yeah,
Anyway, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World webcast. I'd also like to thank my producer, Cap Diacetti. And someday we'll have to get in touch in person again, like that one time we had lunch. That was great.
yeah. That was great. So next, well, I know you're coming down, but I think I'm having a colonoscopy
Yeah,
then.
you said that.
So yeah,
Exactly.
so I
I love
can't come
days to
down.
have the colonoscopy. Anyway, my friend, good speaking to you. We'll be in touch.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.